Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is the second episode in the series, Parent Leadership for 21st Century Children. Learning to more accurately observe and understand your children in 5 developmental areas can help you better understand what your children are growing toward and how you can help them. In this episode, Dr. Scoresby describes a developmental perspective in these 5 important areas of children's growth. Visit mattersmostmedia.org to find more about the podcast and firstanswers.com to find tons of relationship resources.
This is the second episode in a series having to do with parent leadership. The reason I'm interested in this is because as the years have passed and I've spent more time working with families that have challenges in their marriages or challenges between parents and children or challenges with the children, I've discovered that quite often, in fact, a very high percent of the time, parents turn out to be so reactive to their children's behavior that they're not providing the kind of leadership that would allow them to identify a positive ideal and have a plan to work towards it. Sometimes, for example, when a child manifests a character problem, that has done something wrong or is dishonest or something else like that, instead of them having a weak character, it's often because they don't have a positive ideal that they can follow. And while parents may think, well, our example should be enough, quite often their examples are unclear. And even if they are clear, there may not be a plan that children understand about how to get there. So this episode is titled, Making Sure Your Children Know They Are Known by You. Now the purpose is this. The idea of leading is probably familiar to you, but applying leadership principles to parenting may not be. Now, the purpose of this episode is to describe how parent leadership invites you to learn leadership concepts and then apply, that is, adapt them to your children more thoroughly and specifically to help them grow and develop in a positive way. So, gaining a developmental perspective, that is, understanding how children develop and grow over time, will help you know what you need to do and what you can do to be successful. In your efforts to know your children and keep acquainted with them, you may need to make a few adjustments. One is to sharpen your abilities to observe them. Another is to understand what healthy development is. And still another is to slow down or eliminate children's access to electronic devices so they can benefit from increased contact time with you. Now, if both parents are present and engaging both on these tasks, then both parents can be involved and the children will benefit. Now, without excessive use of social media, parent leadership that focuses on children's development and growth is the process which brings a more complete engagement of parents as mentors to their children and children's willingness to follow parents' leadership. Now, I'm going to repeat that. If you are studying what is it that enables children to willingly follow what the parents suggest, quite often, in fact, a significant percent of the time, children's willingness to follow parents' leadership is based on how well the children believe they are known by their parents. Now, I know that you're probably thinking, well, I live with my children, I understand them pretty well, and I also can understand them a little bit about how they grow from year to year, and we take pictures at the beginning of every school year so I can look at the difference and say, wow, he's sure grown a lot, or she has this year. And I do want to encourage you to do that, because parents who know even a little about how children grow can be more successful in contributing to it. Now, this implies something that I think I should make more explicit. What we're after is positive development of our children. We want to know how to foster that in a variety of areas. We want to know what we can do to contribute to them mentally and emotionally, morally, and socially. And we'd like to have the skills or the tools that help them advance and be sufficiently mature at the stage they're in so that they can successfully manage the tasks that are required of them according to their age. So we call it a developmental perspective. That is, learn how children change over time. And this developmental perspective, we will learn, has to do with their mental or cognitive processes, their emotions, the social behavior, their moral behavior, as well as learning how they deal with things physically. Now, to learn about this form of development or a developmental perspective, it's useful to understand that there are two general categories of growth. One is biological growth, that's the nature, and the other is growth that comes from learning and experience, that's the nurture. Now, knowing both of these allows you to make adjustments to your children that help them feel secure, known, and cared for. In short, it helps you see your children as developing, changing, and growing. This means you can learn to anticipate some of what your children are going to need. Well, here's why. Biological growth has its own goal. It is completion, meaning that children will be motivated to complete whatever form of growth they inherit. So examples of this might include learning to walk, developing language, and showing more mature mental skills. They just want to be able to do it. And so sometimes when we're dealing with young children and we want to do something for them, they'll resist and say, no, I want to do this because they're working on some form of biologically motivated development. Now, in contrast, when children's growth is from learning or their experience, they will attempt to make themselves competent. And competent means that they will struggle until they become very good at whatever they inherit or whatever their talents are. Examples include learning a sport, certain kinds of social skills with people, and character qualities like honesty and integrity. Now, becoming competent means children will try until they've acquired expertise. Now, imagine that as a parent, you can see both biological growth and growth in a framework of children's continual development. Applying parental leadership will show you how to observe each child and do something to help your children grow and even achieve more with your help than they would without it. In describing this process, I am going to use the word healthy, and I want it to mean, and hopefully you'll understand, that the word healthy means a positive form of growth that helps children be successful in a variety of areas. It's not just physical health or well-being. And as you know, since children can display both healthy and not healthy behavior, I believe that you'll be able to understand both better if you have some understanding of healthy growth. That is, what's the optimal? What is the best way for children to thrive and grow? If you wanted to improve your child's intelligence, for example, could you? And what would you do? Or let's suppose that they were a little delayed in their emotions and they whined and cried and withdrew more than you'd like. What sorts of things do you do to help them develop a more mature emotional personality? In interviews with parents, I have asked how they knew their child had a problem. Some didn't for a long period of time. And I ask what their definition of healthy and successful is. Some parents' opinions range from not so positive to very positive. But as part of this process, I could see that some very satisfied and more successful parents viewed their children differently than others who, because of some serious problems with their kids, thought of themselves as much less successful. It didn't seem at first that the differences in the way parents thought of their children mattered much, because I thought their differences existed because some had children with problems and some did not. Almost all the parents loved their kids and seemed committed to them, even though some stated that sometimes they didn't like them. But I began to see that the way parents viewed their children might be at least part of what made the conflicts between them and what prevented conflict. And those who were the most successful viewed their children in what I came to say as a developmental perspective. That is, they could identify how children developed, and therefore they could adjust what they did as parents and promote positive success-oriented behavior. They could also tell when success wasn't being achieved, and that gave them better solutions of what they could do to promote growth. And I came to believe that this point of view or perspective should be a part of parent leadership. It is like one parent said, Well, after I learned how children develop in a healthy way, it changed how I viewed my children. Well, okay. Now, instead of just focusing on what they are doing wrong and trying to stop it, when I see, she said, one of my kids make a mistake, I just think he's not finished yet and start thinking what he needs to learn instead. So in my experience, many parents think they are promoting the growth of their children, partly because they see birthdays come and go. And it's true. Children will grow. But the evidence is clear that parents, if they knew how to promote development and growth, they could actually help their children achieve more and accomplish more than they would otherwise. So, for example, parents who have certain abilities like reading or singing or sports promote those abilities with their children. And parents who do not have these same abilities are left to find some other way. Parenthood, as you know, however, is more than promoting talents or abilities. Parenthood is also about guiding, providing direction, educating, helping children reach full possibilities for themselves, and many other things. And I refer you again to the idea that parenthood is more than setting rules and enforcing them, using threats of or real consequences for mistakes, or letting children roam freely around the world. At least in our case, with the idea of leadership, parenting is about knowing children and then involving them in the enterprise of growing themselves to a remarkable form of adulthood. Parenthood is, in short, about people making. That is why parent leadership is usually different than other forms of parenting, in that parents typically spend a bit more time keeping up with and gathering information about their children. And if you want to apply this form of leadership, I am proposing that that's what you do. These parents adjust their family time to promote that. And why is that? Well, many parents I've interviewed over the years, along with their children, inform me that one of the best parts of parent leadership is the increased understanding that parents gain of their children and the children felt from their parents. However, according to them, this required that they change how they viewed their children from less to more positive and from less groupie to more individuals. There are a lot of parents who believe they have adequate knowledge of their children, that is, until they discover something that brings to light they don't. In clinical settings involving adolescent children, counselors have asked children questions about themselves and then asked parents what they knew about their kids. According to numerous accounts, many parents know less than half of what children were involved in. One man, for example, learned that his son had started looking at pornography at age 10, and by age 14 was seriously addicted to it. His response was like many other parents. He put his hands over his face and repeated, "Where have I been? Where have I been?" And as is often the case, some portion of a child's difficulty can be linked to not being well known by those who are attempting to teach and guide them. This is why one of the first foundation principles of leadership is to, 1, continually learn about your children, and 2, make certain your children know that you know them. So the first step is to train yourself to observe, to correctly interpret, and then to understand what you're seeing. Now, of course, there are many types of child development. So many, in fact, they can all be listed here. So the question I ask myself is, well, what skill could you improve to great advantage to you and to your children and ensure your judgment about them is accurate? I believe to implement parent leadership, you'll need to sharpen your observational skills. And if you train yourself to observe more accurately, you'll be able to use this information confidently. So, I'm starting with 5 general categories of development and ask that you learn about them and use them to observe your children. Please plan on sharpening your observation skills so you can ask your children about themselves and confirm or disconfirm their answers by data you have observed. I'm inviting you to learn how to improve your observation skills by learning these 2 kinds of child development. One is to observe and understand at least 5 kinds of healthy child development, and the other is to identify when your children are not successfully developing or growing. So here are the 5. Physical development, which includes all things related to a child's body. Some of these are weight, height, walking, running, toilet training, health, sexual maturation, gender roles, and so on. Number 2, social development. Kids start social development as soon as they're born. Babies initiate 80% of the contact between parents and children. They smile, show more affection to their father than to an uncle, indicating they can tell one person from another. And they also develop many other forms of social skills or abilities. Social development is about how children act when in association with others, including friends, adults, strangers, those in authority, and so on. And as you know, social success depends on the ability to share, cooperate, negotiate differences, and understand others. So having some idea about social development can influence what you teach your children and how to help them be successful. Okay, third, emotional development. Emotional development takes place over time because all emotions are not present at birth. And it would be important for you to know that there are negative emotions like anger and anxiety, positive emotions like love and happiness, and there are emotional states which are the body's response. That's what's happening inside the body, blood pressure and facial expressions, emotional displays through nonverbal and verbal communication, and emotional experience, which only the individual child knows about. So if you're looking at a child, you can say what's happening to its body. I can tell what happens. I was interviewing a young adult the other day, and while we were talking, I watched red splotches occur on her neck. And I stopped and said, "Would you please tell me what's making you anxious?" And she said, "I'm afraid I won't know your answers." And then we began to talk about the anxiety, and she calmed down, and we had a very worthwhile experience. So it also turns out that emotional development is learning to understand your own feelings, recognizing what others feel, and adapting how a person shows feeling in every situation. And as it turns out, we would like every child to develop more positive than negative feelings. So I have done 3 so far: physical development, social development, emotional development. How about mental development? Well, you're probably aware that mental development involves intelligence, creativity, school learning, memory, and the ability to make good decisions. It includes logic and imagination. Mental development can include teaching children to think before they act, to deliberate before deciding, being able to focus and not be distracted, and assume responsibility for controlling some of their thoughts. If you knew about mental development, you could teach your children all sorts of skills about learning. As it turns out, in our school system, for example, the curriculum for most subjects does not include teaching children the mental tools that allow them to be successful. If you knew how to do this, you could help your children be way more successful than they might be. And then last is moral development. Moral development is about forming a sense of right and wrong, of how to resolve dilemmas where choices are forced on us, and also where we take a look at what helps or harms people. It involves honesty, empathy, integrity, self-control, courage, resisting pressure, understanding what helps and harms people, and regulating oneself to help others. Now, if you knew all of that, then you could pay attention and help your children form conscience, which leads to self-regulation. You can help your children delay their gratification and demonstrate integrity and responsibility, for example, and do it more effectively if you knew what you were watching and seeing and then had a plan to go out about and teach it. That is what parent leadership is about. Identifying your developmental period or stage of your children and then forming a plan to help you promote development so that your children are feeling successful and you are on the positive side of parenting. After hearing all this, you might be thinking, "Oh, seems like too much to me." But on the other hand, think about how much time it would take to solve a problem when you didn't notice it, or how much would be missed if you were unaware of some things that allow children to succeed. I'm going to do my best to kindly persuade you to readjust what you'll need to do to take time to think about and observe your children, and observe these 5 categories of behavior: physical, mental, social, emotional, and moral, so that you can identify the successful levels when children achieve them, and you can identify what they're not doing well and help them be more successful.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit firstanswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.